Namaste, good morning, and welcome to the Vedanta Society of Greater Houston and our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Om Sarva Jiva Papanashakaranam Bhaveshwaram Swikritam cha garbhavasa deha pashamidrusham Yapitam swalilaya cha yena divya jivanam Yapitam swalilaya cha yena divya jivanam Tannamami Deva Deva Ramakrishna Ishwaram. Om Shri Vivekanandari Satchishya Supujitaya Shri Sharada Devya Virata Sevitaya Shri Ramakrishna Paramahamsaya Avatara Varishtaya Te Namaha. We salute Sri Ramakrishna, God of gods and Lord of existence, who of his own free will took on human birth and lived a luminous life of divine play for the destruction of human ills. We salute that incarnation of God, Paramahamsa Ramakrishna, who was worshipped by pure-hearted disciples like Vivekananda, and who was ceaselessly served by Sri Sarada Devi, the Divine Mother herself. Om Tavakatamritam Tapta Jivanam Kavibhiriditam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Shri Maratatam Bhuvi Grinanti Ye Bhuridha Jana. O Lord, your nectar-like words are praised by the wise and full of auspiciousness. They destroy the curse of evil, bring good to those who hear them, and bring new life to those who are scorched by the ills of worldly existence. Magnanimous indeed are they who spread your message. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Om peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So today we will begin where we left off last time, and in this book it is on page 279 near the bottom, A New Day, Monday, August 20th, 1883. So last week we read Sunday, August 19th, so today we're on the 20th. Sri Ramakrishna was sitting on his bed inside the mosquito net, meditating. It was about 8 o'clock in the evening. M was sitting on the floor with his friend Hari Babu. Hari, a young man of 28, had lost his wife about 11 years before and had not married a second time. He was much devoted to his parents, brothers, and sister. So this is interesting because it's the only time I remember, there may be other times, but the only time I remember in the gospel where it says Sri Ramakrishna was meditating. As we'll see in what follows, Sri Ramakrishna really had no need for meditation because he was established in the highest state. So for him, as he told Totapuri, when he asked Totapuri, who had attained to Nirvikalpa Samadhi, why he, Totapuri, still meditated regularly every day. And Totapuri said he was polishing his kamandalu, brass kamandalu or bell metal kamandalu. And so he said, just as this kamandalu, if I don't polish it every day, it begins to get tarnished, so the mind must be immersed in meditation every day. Then Sri Ramakrishna replied, but if the kamandalu is made out of gold, then there's no tarnish. And so, as with other things, Sri Ramakrishna was teaching Totapuri that when one has attained to the highest state, then the mind is like gold. It never gets tarnished again. What can tarnish it? That which has been merged into Brahman. And again, it's interesting that here Sri Ramakrishna was sitting in his mosquito curtain meditating while M and Hari were seated on the floor before him. Hazra, the narration goes on, Hazra was living at Dakshineshwar. Rakal lived with the master, though now and then he stayed at Adhar's house. Narendra, Bhavanath, Adhar, M, Ram, Manomohan, and other devotees visited the master almost every week. Hriday, the Sri Ramakrishna's nephew, was ill in his home in the country. The master was worried about him. One of the devotees had sent him a little money, but the master did not know it. So probably the one who sent the money to Hriday was M, because he knew that someone had sent money. But M was the embodiment of humility, so he would never draw attention to himself, saying, I sent money, or M sent money to Hriday. So by this time, Hriday had already been fired and driven out of the Dakshineshwar temple because of an offense. He had worshipped the daughter of the manager of the temple, the young girl, and there would be nothing wrong with that, except that the manager of the temple was a member of Rasmani's family, Mathur Babu's family, and was therefore of a low caste. And so for a high caste Brahmin like Hriday to worship a low caste girl, it was thought that that would bring misfortune to the girl and her family. And so because Hriday certainly would have known that, and yet he did it anyway, and so he was driven out of the temple. It's one of the complex things with the caste system, which is very difficult to understand unless you have lived within it for a long time or were born within it, because it had nothing to do with money or wealth or the things that make class in Western society. So Hriday was an employee of the temple, and he was driven out angrily by the temple manager for this offense. And so you think that, well, Hriday was a high caste, so how could a low caste man drive him out and scold him? Well, no, that was quite possible because he was the employer of Hriday. And so again, the dynamics of caste are much more complicated, complex than we in the West think. And they are founded on a completely different sensibility from the way that we think of class. And so anyway, Hriday, the main point is that Hriday had already been driven out of the garden by this time, and was living at home. And we had seen some days in the reading some days before that Sri Ramakrishna was very concerned about Hriday. So now that concern continued. When Sri Ramakrishna came out of the mosquito net and sat on the small couch, the devotees saluted him. So again, he'd been sitting, those of you who have been to his room at Dakshineshwar, and others of you, some of you have seen photographs of his room. So there was the big cot, which was up against the wall, and then a slightly lower, narrower cot in front of that. So there's a cot and then another cot right in front of it. So he was in the mosquito curtain on the larger cot, the cot that was used for sleeping. And then he came out of the net and sat on the smaller cot, the narrower cot, which is where he used to sit when he was speaking to the devotees, and the devotees on the floor below. Master to M. I was meditating inside the net. It occurred to me that meditation, after all, was nothing but the imagining of a form, and so I did not enjoy it. One gets satisfaction if God reveals himself in a flash. Again, I said to myself, who is it that meditates, and on whom does he meditate? So for us in meditation, one type of meditation, which obviously Sri Ramakrishna was speaking of here, we visualize the form of the chosen ideal, usually within the heart, sometimes here, but usually within the heart. And so we visualize that to picture it as living, as conscious, as full of grace, as smiling, etc. But it is a mental creation. And what we hope will happen one day is that the mind will become established in that, the mind will flow towards that mentally created image for a long time, and then that image itself will give way to the reality, to the chosen ideal, not mentally created, but the chosen ideal will reveal itself. And so Sri Ramakrishna, sitting for meditation, obviously was picturing a deity. So he says that, but I didn't enjoy it because I thought this is just a mental image. Sri Ramakrishna, who could go into Nirvikalpa Samadhi at any time he wanted, who could go into Savikalpa Samadhi, Bhava Samadhi, different types of Samadhi at the drop of a pin. The slightest thing would remind him of God, and his mind would be plunged into the divinity. And so who knows the play of Sri Ramakrishna, of one like him, that sometimes he was inert like a piece of wood where there was no response from his body. You even touch his open eyeball and there would be no blinking or anything, no response at all. Other times you'd be like a child. Sometimes you'd be like a very dignified and highly intelligent speaker on the topic of God, and all different types of moods. And so suddenly he decided, I'm going to meditate. And so for us to try to figure out why did he even try to do it? Well, Ramakrishna was a person of infinite moods, Ananta Rupa, and Ananta Bhava, many manifestations in many moods. And so for him, religion was the field of play and delight, where he danced through the field of religion. So he just decided, I'll meditate. But he didn't enjoy it because he realized that this is just a mental creation, picturing a form, when he had already known the reality itself. And then, as he says, he thought, who is meditating and on what are they meditating? Who is it that meditates and on whom does he meditate? M. Yes, sir. You said that God himself has become everything, the universe and all living beings. Even he who meditates is God. And so, of course, again, Sri Ramakrishna, out of a sense of his divine curiosity, seeking God in many different ways, trying many different moods and aspects and practices. He tries to meditate, but then he realizes, well, who is meditating on whom? Master, what is more, one cannot meditate unless God wills it. One can meditate when God makes it possible for one to do so. What do you say? So that's a very important thing, that one cannot meditate unless God wills it. So what we have to do is to try to meditate. And that is like raising the sail of our boat of life so that we can catch the wind of God's grace. And one day we'll find that the obstacles to meditation have been swept away, whether it takes a few years or a whole lifetime, that we can't say. But we have to go on trying to meditate as long as that doesn't happen. But when that happens, we don't feel that, oh, I suddenly got it. Now I've got it. Now I know what to do, and I like riding a bicycle, now I can keep my point of balance. No, it's not like that. You feel that suddenly the obstacle has been removed, and you had nothing to do with it. Suddenly the mind goes where it's supposed to go. And so that's the grace of God. So until that comes, we have to go on applying ourselves. So the grace of God is behind every success, that's true. But the grace of God is not under our control. That's why it's called grace. And so when we don't feel the grace of God, then that's the time when we have to go on doing our part. Again, raising the sail of the boat of life, as Sri Ramakrishna put it. So again, M says, I'll read it again to continue with what the master then says. M, yes, sir, you said that God himself has become everything, the universe and all living beings. Even he who meditates is God. master. Oh, I read the next part too, so I'll continue down to where M speaks again. What is more, one cannot meditate unless God wills it. One can meditate when God makes it possible for one to do so. What do you say? M. True, sir. You feel like that because there is no I in you. When there is no ego, one feels like that. So M is saying that because you have no sense of aham, no sense of I, no sense of an individuated self separate from everything else, that everything happens by the grace of God. So, but the master says, but it is good to have a trace of ego which makes it possible for a man to feel that he is the servant of God. As long as a man thinks that it is he who is doing his duties, it is very good for him to feel that God is the master and he God's servant. When one is conscious of doing work, one should establish with God the relationship of servant and master. And so here Sri Ramakrishna says that it's good to have a trace of ego because that makes it possible to one feel, makes it possible for one to feel that I am a servant of God. I'm a servant of God and I am doing God's work. So, of course, if we could do without ego altogether and merge in Brahman, that would be a different case. But here Sri Ramakrishna is speaking of the fact that getting rid of the ego is not at all easy. That comes only at the heights of spiritual life. And so for us who are practicing, it's better to establish what he called the ripe ego, the paka-ami. The ripe ego, that is, I am the servant of God, I am the child of God, I am the friend of God. But here he's talking in terms of being the servant of God. So is he saying that that is the attitude that we should take up, that God is the master and I'm the servant? Not exactly. Of course, he's speaking of the attitude of a servant of God, but that attitude is larger than just I am the servant and God is my master. The attitude of I am a child of the Divine Mother. There also one wants to serve the Mother. One has the attitude of the friend of God. There also one wants to serve one's friend. One has the attitude of I am the mother and God is my child. There also the mother wants to serve the child. And so the attitude of serving, that extends through all of the attitudes, including the Madhura Bhava, the attitude of between the lover and the beloved. There also the attitude of service. And so when he's speaking here of having the attitude of the servant of God, again, it doesn't restrict it to the attitude of Hanuman towards Sri Ram as the servant to the master. All of the attitudes include that attitude of service. So M was always reflecting on the nature of the Supreme Brahman. So here there's a break in the line of thought. M just mentions about himself that he was always reflecting on the nature of Parabrahma, the Supreme Brahman, master to M. Like the Akasha, Brahman is without any modification. So Akasha means a space. There's a more complex meaning to it, but I won't go into that. That's why sometimes it's translated as ether. But in modern physics, since the time of Einstein, the idea of ether has practically disappeared, though some physicists are reviving it again right now, a few physicists. But Akasha means also space. And so Sri Ramakrishna says, like the Akasha, or like space, Brahman is without any modification. It has become manifold because of Shakti, that is the divine power, Maya Shakti. Again, Brahman is like fire, which itself has no color. The fire appears white if you throw a white substance into it, red if you throw a red, black if you throw a black. The three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, belong to Shakti alone. So here, of course, he's speaking of putting substances as chemicals which make the fire burn different colors. So the three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, belong to Shakti alone. And those are red, white, and black, the traditional colors associated with the three gunas. Black, tamas; red, rajas, because of activity and passion, etc., and white, sattva, because of purity, transparency, etc. Brahman itself is beyond the three gunas. So again, he's talking to him about Brahman here because he knows that M has been thinking, spending a lot of time thinking about Brahman, about the Supreme Brahman. What Brahman is cannot be described. It is beyond words, and that's what we've been studying recently in the Kena Upanishad. That which remains after everything is eliminated by the Vedantic process of neti neti, not this, and which is of the nature of bliss, is Brahman. So when you say not this, anything that comes to the mind, you say not this, neti neti atma. The self or Brahman is not this, whatever can be thought of, whatever can be perceived, no to all of it. Everything that arises in the mind, words, images, comparisons, everything that comes to the mind, not this, and what is left when everything has been negated is Brahman, that which can never be negated, but which can never be made the content of the mind nor the object of perception. And so that is Brahman. So what Brahman is cannot be described, it is beyond words. That which remains after everything is eliminated by the Vedantic process of not this, and which is of the nature of bliss, is Brahman. Suppose the husband of a young girl has come to his father-in-law's house and is seated in the drawing room with other young men of his age. The girl and her friends are looking at them through the window. Her friends do not know her husband and ask her, pointing to one young man, "Is that your husband?" "No," she answers, smiling. They point to another young man and ask, "Is he her husband?" Again, she answers, "No." They repeat the question, referring to a third, and she gives the same answer, "No." At last, they point to her husband and ask, "Is he the one?" She neither says yes nor no, but only smiles and keeps quiet. Her friends realize that he is her husband. One becomes silent on realizing the true nature of Brahman. So that's a beautiful example, that the young bride has come home to her parents' home, or she's still living with her parents. She hasn't gone yet to live with her husband. In the old days in India, when people were married young, before they went to live together, then the young man has come to her home and is sitting there with friends, and her friends ask, looking through the window at them, "Is this your husband?" "No." "This?" "No." "This?" "No." Finally, they, by the process of elimination, they find out who her husband is, and there she remains silent. And so through the process of neti neti, anything that comes to the mind, no, no, no. But it's not like the shunya of the Buddhists. Now, yes, I believe that as far as shunyata is experiential, that can be harmonized with the idea of Brahman, certainly. But the philosophical idea is quite different, and especially as it's interpreted by certain followers of the Shunyavada of Buddhism, those who follow Chandrakirti, one of the great commentators who formed one of the schools, the Prasangika school of interpretation of Shunyavada. So in that school of Shunyavada, which is followed by the school which the Dalai Lama belongs to, they say you go on saying not this, and you never come to an end. It's just continual rejection. Everything is empty, everything is empty. But Vedanta says, as does the Swatantrika school of Shunyavada in Mahayana Buddhism, which is not followed by the dominant school in Tibet, they say that reality is left when you say not this, and you reject everything that can be conceived by the mind or perceived by the senses. You're left with the fullness of reality. You're not left with nothing. You're left with the fullness of reality. And so that's why when the girls point to the fourth boy, and say, "Is that your husband?" Perhaps he's the only one left in the group. And the girl just smiles and keeps quiet, because when one realizes Brahman, then no words can express it. So one smiles because it's the experience of unending bliss, unending bliss. But one is left silent. No words can express it. No images can capture it. No definition can explain it. And so that is the experience of Brahman. So again, Sri Ramakrishna is speaking for the sake of M, who is uh, thinking of the Supreme Brahman. One other thing, let me explain about M and Brahman, that when M came to Sri Ramakrishna, he of course had been like most of the people coming to Sri Ramakrishna at this time. He had been deeply influenced by the Brahma Samaj. And the Brahma Samaj, as you know, and I've explained many times in this class, they followed what they considered a reformed Hinduism, which was based on many ideas of Unitarian Christianity. And they worshipped Brahma, but their idea of Brahma was Saguna Brahma, that is Brahma with qualities, that is Brahma as Ishvara. So they weren't worshiping Para Brahma, the Supreme Brahman, which is the absolute. They didn't believe in that. They were trying to come up with a monotheistic God from the Vedas. And so they settled on Brahma and interpreted Brahma of the Upanishads as Ishvara, as God, as personal God, as a monotheistic God. And so, of course, Brahman is not that. Brahman, at least according to the Advaitavada, is the absolute, the transcendent reality beyond description. And so here we see that M had gone from his belief in Brahma as Ishvara, as a formless personal God, Saguna with qualities. He'd gone from that to now thinking about the Parabrahma, the Supreme Brahman, the absolute beyond all qualities. And so Sri Ramakrishna is instructing him in that. So he says to him, "Well, why do I talk so much?" So he asks that immediately after saying that when one realizes Brahman, one becomes silent, as the girl in the story. When they pick out her true husband, neti, 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 iti, this is it. Then she remains silent. So Sri Ramakrishna has just finished speaking about that, and he says, "So why do I talk so much?" M. You talk in order to awaken the spiritual consciousness of the devotees. You once said that when an uncooked luchi is dropped into boiling ghee, it makes a sizzling noise. So for those of you who don't know luchis or puris, a luchi is like a puri in Indian cooking. It's made similar to a chapati, a flat round bread, and then it's dropped in hot ghee. And of course, the moisture in the dough causes sizzling, lots of bubbling and sizzling as the moisture is fried out of it, and the dough is cooked and turns a light brown. So Sri Ramakrishna used that example for saying that when one is in the early stages of spiritual life, it's like being a raw luchi dropped into hot oil. And so one talks a lot, has a lot of ideas, thinks a lot about things, and wants to inquire into this and ask questions about this, that, and the other thing. But when the luchi is done, then it becomes silent. And that's the way you know that it's done, from the color and from the fact that the water has been cooked out in the hot oil, and the oil becomes silent. So one becomes silent. So here that M mentions that, but that doesn't seem to fit Sri Ramakrishna at all. He wasn't talking because he was a raw luchi. So, but what he said before that is true. That is, you talk in order to awaken the spiritual consciousness of the devotees. So Sri Ramakrishna didn't need to be fried in ghee. He had already become the ghee itself by his identity with Brahman. But he did talk in order to awaken spiritual consciousness in the devotees. In fact, as we know, the natural tendency of his mind was to be absorbed in Brahman. That was where his mind always tended to go. And he had to work to keep his mind down at this plane where he could interact with the devotees, so that he could speak with the devotees, instruct the devotees. And so he actually had to hold on to some petty desires, like I will have a glass of water or something like that. He would hold on to some petty desire in order to bring his mind down from the highest plane to a plane where he could talk with the devotees. So the master began to talk to him about Hazra. And Hazra, as we know, was a distant relative of Sri Ramakrishna, a very funny character. He added a lot of spice to the play of Sri Ramakrishna, and not a bad person, but a hypocrite. He certainly was a hypocrite, and there was a lot of trouble to Sri Ramakrishna also. The master: do you know the nature of a good man? He never troubles others. So here, if M had not mentioned that Sri Ramakrishna was talking about Hazra, we wouldn't have known the context, because Sri Ramakrishna doesn't mention Hazra. But we know that Hazra was always giving trouble to Sri Ramakrishna and to others. So Sri Ramakrishna says, do you know the nature of a good man? He never troubles others. He doesn't harass people. The nature of some people is such that when they go to a feast, they want special seats. A man who has true devotion to God never makes a false step, never gives others trouble for nothing. So in the Gita, in the 12th chapter, in the 15th verse, there's the phrase, Nodvijate, Yasman Nodvijate Loko, from whom the world receives no disturbance. So in better English, it comes out to one who does not disturb the world, and one who is not disturbed by the world also, it goes on to say. And so the good person, the sadhu, which doesn't mean just a monk, it's sometimes applied that way, but a sadhu means a good person of any type. So the good person doesn't give trouble to the world. That was driven into my mind very wonderfully by Swami Shraddhananda, one of our great Swamis, who was the head of our Sacramento Center for many years. In India, he had been the editor of the Udbodhan magazine, and then he came to San Francisco and became head of Sacramento, where he passed away a couple of decades ago, probably 20 years or so ago, or more. And so Swami Shraddhananda, when he had come down to San Diego, where I was living at that time, was spending the night over, he gave a talk and was spending the night, something came up that I realized that the Swami was used to having something. And I said, oh, Maharaj, we don't have it. I'll go to the store immediately and get it. And he said, no, please don't. I said, Maharaj, there's no trouble. I'll go right now. And he says, no, please don't. I'm insisting that you not go. The Gita says that the holy person should never give trouble to the world. And I try to follow that. And so he wouldn't let me go, because it would have given, in his mind, it would have given me trouble to go out and run to the store late at night to get something for him. And so he insisted on doing without it instead of having it. So that idea that the good person, you don't even have to be a holy person to take this advice. The good person doesn't cause trouble to others. Some people, as Sri Ramakrishna says, when they go to a feast and then they insist on having a good seat. And the people who, when they go to a restaurant, they start remaking the restaurant. They say, oh, could you close the window? Could you turn the air conditioning up a little bit, make it a little warmer? Could you move this table over there? Could you, and on the menu, well, I want this, but I don't like these things in it. And could you take these out and fix it a little differently? So everything is, everything is made so that for your custom comfort. And so, no, the good person doesn't give trouble to the world. Then he goes on to say, So again, he was saying this in the context of talking about Hazra, because he was always giving trouble. It is not good to live in the company of bad people. A man should stay away from them and thus protect himself. To him, isn't that so? So that, of course, is advice that we know Sri Ramakrishna speaks of over and over. The disciples of Sri Ramakrishna spoke of it a great deal, the importance of holy company. And so if you want to get warm, you approach a fire and you stay away from the things that will make you cold. And so if you want to become spiritual, you stay near those that have caught the spiritual fire, and stay away from those who tend to put it out, who put out your aspiration. So the importance of holy company. And then M says about that, when Sri Ramakrishna says about keeping a good company and staying away from bad company, and he says, Sri Ramakrishna says, isn't that so? Then M says, yes, sir, the mind sinks far down in the company of the wicked, but it is quite different with a hero, as you say, a vira, a hero, as you say. Master, how is that? So Sri Ramakrishna probably wanted to test M's understanding. M, when a fire is feeble, it goes out when even a small stick is thrown into it. But a blazing fire is not affected even if a plantain tree is thrown into it. The tree itself is burnt to ashes. A plantain tree, meaning a banana tree. And so a banana tree, of course, is full of water. And if you just try to start a fire with a banana tree, you won't have any luck. But if you have a blazing fire, even a fresh banana tree, if you chop it down and throw it in, the water will cook out and the whole thing will be burnt to ashes. But a small fire, a stick thrown into it, can put it out. And so the analogy is for we who are aspirants, who are beginners on the spiritual path. Then bad company coming into our orbit, it puts out the little fire that we've managed to keep burning. But if we become blazing fires of spirituality, then nothing can put that out. And impurities are burnt up in our presence. And so people like Swami Vivekananda, Narendra at this time, Narendranath, Sri Ramakrishna would always say that the fire of knowledge was a blazing fire, that all impurities would be burnt within it. And so he said Narendra didn't have to be careful of food or anything else, because he was such a blazing fire of spirituality. So the master asked him about his friend Hari Babu. So again, Hari, this young man who had come, we met him at the beginning of the reading today. He had come as a friend of M's, and it mentioned at the beginning that he had been married, but he was 28 years old at this point, similar in age to M, but his wife had died 11 years earlier, and he had not remarried. He took care of his parents and brothers and sisters. So the master asked him about his friend Hari Babu. M, he has come here to pay you his respects. He lost his wife long ago. Master to Hari, what kind of work do you do? And then M answers for Hari, nothing in particular, but at home he takes good care of his parents and his brothers and sisters. Master with a smile, how is that? You are like Elder the pumpkin cutter. This is from a story that he's going to tell. You are like Elder the pumpkin cutter. You are neither a man of the world nor a devotee of God. That is not good. You must have seen the sort of elderly man who lives in a family and is always ready day or night to entertain the children. He sits in the parlor and smokes the hubble bubble. With nothing in particular to do, he leads a lazy life. Now and again he goes to the inner court and cuts a pumpkin. For since the women do not cut pumpkins, they send the children to ask him to come and do it. That is the extent of his usefulness, hence his nickname, Elder the Pumpkin Cutter. So here, instead of being pleased, though this young man, he hasn't married and he stays home taking care of his elderly parents and his brothers and sisters. Oh, isn't that wonderful? He's full of the spirit of service. He's not interested in entering the world. Sri Ramakrishna sees through all of that. And C is that the motivation, that there's a basic laziness there, and that he is basically avoiding responsibilities, and avoiding complications, and so forth. And so his staying home to take care of his elderly parents and brothers and sisters is basically an excuse for having an easy life. And so Sri Ramakrishna was not at all in favor of that, and compares him to this elderly relative who lives in the house doing nothing much but sitting around playing with the kids, and then once in a while when he's needed going to cut the pumpkin for the ladies in the kitchen. So, you must do this as well as that, he continues, talking to Hari. Do your duties in the world, and also fix your mind on the lotus feet of the Lord. Read books of devotion like the Bhagavata or the life of Chaitanya when you are alone and have nothing else to do. So here, Sri Ramakrishna is not saying that you have to go out and get a job, but you have to engage yourself properly. He says what he sees in the young man is someone who is avoiding responsibility and leading a lazy life, but he's not using his time, which he has acquired by not remarrying and not getting a job and so forth, that he has a lot of free time now. He could use it for spiritual practice, but he has no aspiration. He has no interest in spiritual things. So he's just leading a lazy life. So Sri Ramakrishna is telling him that you, in your free time, you should read sacred books. So it was about 10 o'clock. Sri Ramakrishna finished a light supper of farina pudding and one or two luchis. After saluting him, M and his friend took their leave, his friend Hari. So as far as we know, M and Hari were the only two present, because nobody else in this day is mentioned. The only two who were with him this evening. And just a note again for those who don't know the culture and the food and so forth, when it says that he finished some farina pudding, that's all it's actually called in Bengal a suji payas. Suji means farina, and you fry the farina, you roast it, and you cook it in milk until the milk thickens, and you sweeten it. It's a delightful and rich pudding, but it's just farina. There may be a ghee in it, in which it's roasted, and thickened milk. And so that is that Sri Ramakrishna would eat with luchi, that is the fried bread. So then we come to Friday, September 7th, 1883. Let us go ahead and enter this next day. This was a couple of weeks later, more than a couple of weeks later. Sri Ramakrishna and M were talking in the master's room at 7:30 in the evening. No one else was present. Master: the other day I went to Calcutta. As I drove along the streets in the carriage, I observed that everyone's attention was fixed on low things. Everyone was brooding over his stomach and running after nothing but food. Everyone's mind was turned to woman and gold. I saw only one or two with their attention fixed on higher things, with their minds turned to God. So, of course, Sri Ramakrishna could see through people like, as he said, like a glass case. M. The present age has aggravated this stomach worry. Trying to imitate the English, people have turned their attention to more luxuries. Therefore, their wants have also increased. And that, of course, has only continued. This was in the 1880s, 1883. So what to speak of 2021, where wants are continually increasing. Life becomes more and more complicated. So yes, we have more comfort. Even poor people today have more comforts than middle-class people did 100 years ago. Middle-class people couldn't have dreamed of the comforts that even poor people have today. Now, by that, I don't mean, as some people do, that poor people of today should be ignored because they have it so well. No, poverty is always relative to what the standard of the time is. And people that are poor by the standard, then they feel poor just as people 100 years ago who were poor by that standard felt poor. And they have limitations on their life that the same as poor people of that time did. So I'm not saying that to say that poor people should stop complaining because they have it so good, but to say that our need for comfort, our need for pleasure, our need for luxury has increased so much that even in people my age, in my lifetime, gone from what was acceptable as a child for a middle class life. Now that's not at all sufficient, that we have to have more things in order to lead an acceptable life in the modern world. So our needs have increased, and as needs increased, our consumption has to increase, and as our consumption increases, our preoccupations increase, our worries increase, and so forth. So, Master, what do the English think about God? They believe in a formless God. Master, that is also one of our beliefs, meaning one of many beliefs. For a time, master and disciple remained silent. Then Sri Ramakrishna began to describe his experiences of Brahman. Master. So again, the previous day recorded here, Sri Ramakrishna was teaching him about Brahman, and now he's talking about his experiences. One day I had the vision of consciousness, non-dual, Advaita, and indivisible. At first it had been revealed to me that there were innumerable men, animals, and other creatures. Among them were aristocrats, the English, the Mussulmans, myself, scavengers, dogs, and also a bearded Mussulman with an earthenware tray of rice in his hand. He put a few grains of rice into everybody's mouth. I too tasted a little. So, being unfamiliar with the culture of the time, that means nothing to us. But what it is showing, especially this last part, of course, the first part is understandable, that Sri Ramakrishna saw that there were all types of people, aristocrats, English, poor people, Muslims, animals, all of that. But then the Muslim giving with a tray of rice and giving rice to everyone, and Sri Ramakrishna himself took some. At that time, that would have been prohibited because Sri Ramakrishna, being an Orthodox Brahmin, he could not have taken anything given to him by a Muslim. But Sri Ramakrishna, of course, didn't observe those things. And in the vision, he took the food, meaning that he saw that all were the same, as the Gita says in several verses in chapter 5, beautiful verses in chapter 5, on the samadarshitva, that is same-sidedness, seeing the same Brahman in all, and not making any distinctions. So another day I saw rice, vegetables, and other foodstuff, and also filth and dirt as well lying around. So in the gospel and in other Indian texts, English texts from India of this period, when it says filth, that always means excreta, human waste. So he sees rice, vegetables, other foodstuff, as well as human waste and dirt lying around also. Suddenly the soul came out of my body, that is the subtle body, came out of his physical body, and like a flame touched everything. It was like a protruding tongue of fire and tasted everything once, even the excreta, the human waste. It was revealed to me that all these are one substance, the non-dual and indivisible consciousness. So here in the first division, he saw that there were aristocrats, high people, low people, British people, Muslims, animals, and so forth, and saw that all were the same Brahman. And here he's seeing foodstuff, delectable items of food, as well as human waste, and seeing that all is the same Brahman. And again, from the subtle body issuing out from his physical body like a flame, and then a tongue of flame comes out and touches each of these items. Another day it was revealed to me that I had devotees, my intimate companions, my very own. Thereafter I would climb to the roof of the kuti as soon as the bells and the conch shells of the evening service sounded in the temples, and cry out with a longing heart, "Oh, where are you all? Come here. I am dying to see you." So the kuti was the house where Sri Ramakrishna lived most of his years in Dakshineshwar. When we go to Dakshineshwar now and we go to his room, that's where he lived the last years of his life. When many devotees were coming to see him, he moved into that room. But much longer years he spent in the kuti, which was the cottage of the owners of the temple, Rani Rasmani and Mathur Babu. They had a large room there for Sri Ramakrishna to use. And so it was during the time when he was living there that it was revealed to him that devotees who belonged to him, who had come for the sake of serving his mission in the world, that they were coming. The Divine Mother showed him. And so when he saw that there were devotees of his own that were coming, then he became restless to see them. And so he would go up onto the roof of the Kunti more than once. He would go up to the roof in the evening at the time of the evening arati, when the bells and the gong and everything were, and the conch shells were being blown. And he would cry out on the roof of the kuti, "Where are you, my children? Come, come. My ears are burnt by the talk of worldly people. Come, come, I want to see you." And after that, his devotees began to come, and he recognized them when they would come, having seen them before in vision. So the interesting thing here is that he did the same thing early in his spiritual life. When he began his spiritual life at Dakshineshwar as a young priest who had come to do the worship in the Kali temple, he would go up onto the same place, the roof of the kuti, where he was living also at that time. Again, he lived there for many years. You go up on the roof of the kuti and cry out to the Divine Mother, to Mother Kali, saying, "Oh, Mother, where are you? Show yourself to me. Another day has passed and still I haven't seen you. Another day has passed and still I have not had your vision." And so he'd cry out in agony to the Divine Mother until eventually, of course, he had the vision of the Divine Mother. So to M, "Well, what do you think of these visions?" M, "God sports through you. This I have realized, that you are the instrument and God is the master. God has created other beings as if with a machine, but yourself he has made with his own hands." Master, "Well, Hazra says that after the vision of God, one acquires the 6 divine powers." M, "Those who seek pure love don't want powers," which is, of course, what Sri Ramakrishna always taught. Master, "Perhaps Hazara was a poor man in his previous life, and that is why he wants so much to see the manifestation of power. He wants to know what I talk about with the cook. He says to me, 'You don't have to talk to the cook. I shall talk to the manager of the temple myself and see that you get everything you want.'" M laughs aloud. "He talks to me that way, and I say nothing." So here we'll stop for today and continue next time. So let me give announcements, and then if there are any questions, I will take those. So for announcements, first I have to correct an announcement that I've been making, which is quite erroneous. I've been saying that on Sunday I am speak on what we can learn from the Buddha and Buddhism. That's not this week, it's in a couple of weeks. And so this Sunday I will speak on the mind in the series Basic Concepts of Vedanta. And so this Sunday, the basic concept I will take up is the mind. And so that will be the lecture this time, not Buddha and Buddhism. And then on Tuesday, we will continue our study of the Kena Upanishad. And then on next Thursday, we'll continue this study of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. So this month, May, we will continue the classes as usual and the lectures as usual. There shouldn't be any exceptions to that. In June, as I've said from time to time, in June we hope to open to in-person classes. Not the first Sunday in June, but after that we hope we'll look at the situation closer to the time and then announce and how we will do it, whether it's by limited occupancy or what, that we will see. But we're hoping that in June we can open at least to limited occupancy so that people can start coming back for classes. Even now, people come by to see the temple, they come to see the shrine, sit in the shrine, etc. But we hope to open for classes again soon. So let's see. Okay. Did Sri Ramakrishna mean that one should either marry and be a family person or should be a sannyasi and not be an unmarried person in the world? And this question comes because of what Sri Ramakrishna said to the young man Hari. No, it wasn't that at all. But he meant that if one doesn't marry, then one should spend the time that one has gained and the freedom of mind that one has gained, one should spend it in spiritual pursuits, because otherwise otherwise one is just avoiding responsibility. So, for instance, Swami Vivekananda said to his disciple Sharat Chandra Chakravarti, who, by the way, was married and had children, but Swamiji said to him that you, Sharat Chandra, you are quite a new type of man. You are neither a sannyasi nor completely a householder, meaning that he was a new type of person that Swamiji meant that positively. The person who, for whatever reason, can't become or doesn't want to become a sannyasi, complete renunciation of the world, but they also don't want to immerse themselves in the world, but lead a life of spiritual practice, as Sharat Chandra did. So that's the basis of the idea among some of our Western devotees of a third order. In the Catholic Church, they have what's called a third order, which is lay people. They haven't joined a monastery, lay people, but they take provisional vows and limited vows under one of the monastic orders, like the Benedictines or the Franciscans or Dominicans, and lead a spiritual life in the home, whether they're married or whether they're unmarried, but they lead it's a way of giving those who want to lead a more intense spiritual life, but who can't or don't want to join an actual monastery, to give them a place within the field of religious activity, so that they can take limited vows, continue to live in the family if they need to, or live alone if they want to, but with a deeper commitment than just their own mental decision to lead a spiritual life. So that's the idea of the third order, which is an actual provision in Roman Catholicism. And so some of our devotees, including the great Marie-Louise Burke, Sister Gargi, who at the end of her life, she became a sannyasini. My guru, Swami Vireshwaranandaji, gave her sannyasa late in her life. But she was a great promoter of that idea. So, who was the Muslim distributing rice in the vision? That he doesn't say. It wasn't a particular person. These weren't people that he knew. It was a vision. So, like in a dream, we see all kinds of people. We don't know who they are. We've never met them before. And so, like that, he sees in the vision an aristocrat, an Englishman. He didn't know who the Englishman was either, and a Muslim. But from his dress, and maybe from the beard, he could see that he was a Muslim, the style of beard. Sri Ramakrishna was always between both worlds. What can we learn from this? Yes, he was always between both worlds. In fact, that the Divine Mother had told him 3 times. The Divine Mother told him, remain in Bhava Mukha, remain in Bhava Mukha. And that's the definition of Bhava Mukha is the borderland between the divine and the realm of manifestation, so that his natural tendency the tendency of his mind was to go towards the divine, but he could pull the mind back and direct it towards the human world as well, so that he was like a window into both worlds. So what we can learn from it is, first of all, that Sri Ramakrishna continues to remain in that state where he's like looking at Sri Ramakrishna, we're looking into the divine world through him. But he also is looking towards us from the edge of the divine world. And so he is a window opening between the two worlds. We can also learn from it that we are caught at this level, but we want to go to that level where we begin to see through the window which is Sri Ramakrishna and which is where Sri Ramakrishna is. That we want to come to that point where we can first look into the divine world and then eventually jump through that window or door and become that which is on the other side. We can become the reality itself. And then as Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda also said in their different ways, that the highest realization is to, after identifying with Brahman, to come back and to into the realm of manifestation where one sees that everything here also is nothing but Brahman. And Swami Vivekananda said at that point one can project a divine personality. That is, one can become that which is like an avatar. One can become one who lives in that realm where Sri Ramakrishna lives. That, of course, is a very, very high state, and not many attain to that. But that, he said, is possible. So you said Hazara was a distant relative of Thakur. How so? I don't remember what the relationship was, but that you can find from the great master, Swami Saradanandaji's biography of Sri Ramakrishna. So I don't remember. Hridaya was a... Yes.
I had a question.
Yes.
So this is not related to the class from today, but this is a question about death. Is this a good time to ask that?
Okay, I'll answer that after the class, since it's not pertaining to the class and this is being live streamed. So I'll answer that afterwards. That's fine. Okay. So with that, I'll give a closing chant. Om Niranjanam Nityam Anantarupam Bhaktanukampa Dhrita Vigraham Vai Ishavataram Parameshamidyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namamaha. We bow in adoration to Sri Ramakrishna, who is stainless, eternal, infinite, the worshipful Supreme Lord who took human birth out of compassion for all. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Om Peace, peace, peace be unto us all.